I'm Anneline Jonker. I work as a researcher at the University of Twente in the Netherlands, but also work as a scientific director for a patient organization working on Duchenne muscular dystrophy. But this work, indeed, I've done together with the International Rare Diseases Research Consortium. And that actually maybe brings me to my very first slide, which is, what is the International Rare Diseases Research Consortium? Well, first of all, I don't know who picked this horrible, horrible name. It's impronounceable for anyone, and especially I've worked with them for the last 8 years. I still haven't gotten better, but it's a combination of, it's an organization that actually got launched in 2011, quite some time ago, with the goal of bringing together funders, patient advocates, and companies that actually fund rare diseases research. And they have an overall vision, which is to enable all people living with a rare disease to receive an accurate diagnosis, care, and therapy within 1 year of coming to medical attention. And we're actually still quite far off, unfortunately. In order to actually help research progress, they've actually set up 3 different goals. One about diagnosis, so to be able to get a diagnosis as soon as possible. Second one, to develop 1,000 new therapies, and then to also work on developing methodology, what the actual impact of diagnosis and therapies are. And they do so by also, in addition to having their funders, patient advocates, and companies together, also have 4 scientific committees that actually help and provide advice and try to find bottlenecks. And sometimes there are topics in which you can actually say, okay, we need more experts to investigate a topic, and in that case, they launch a task force to further dive deep into a topic. Well, this slide doesn't come as a surprise, but sometimes it's still too good to have some statistics. And that is that we have currently over 400 million people worldwide with a rare disease. And well, as we've seen with all the previous talks, the majority of which are actually children. And with this 6,000 to 8,000 rare diseases that we only have currently about 500 drugs that have reached the market. And currently in de novo drugs, about 700 to 800 drugs that are in development, but we also know that most of them might not succeed. So we have quite a tremendous unmet need, and that's why we're all here today, of saying, okay, if we do want to develop new therapies, and ERDIC has set its goal at 1,000, can we somehow, if we see the current rate of de novo drug development, we see that we have about 40 to 15 new therapies developed per year, at least in Europe and the United States. And I'm fully aware that that number actually goes down as soon as we move out of these countries into other regions in the world. It will take actually 500 years to get a treatment for all rare conditions. And then we're not even talking about the fact that certain conditions are actually subconditions with specific mutations within a specific disease or another variation that actually makes it even more complicated. Well, that's the reason why we're all here today, to say, okay, how can we actually work on repurposing for rare diseases? So what we've actually done over the last 2 years, and it's work that has been finished about 6 months ago, is to say we have so many tools out there in the community. We have so many incentives out there. We have resources, we have best practices, we have all kinds of things out there, but we're not always aware that these ones are out there. Before I started, I knew of 4, 5, 6, maybe 10. And actually everyone that I spoke to the best of time, might come to maybe 20 incentives and tools that you are aware of. So can we somehow group them and say, how do they logically make sense to actually be used? So we developed a guidebook that actually brings all this together and try to make it workable for either academics, non-profit organizations, or smaller or even larger biotechs and patient-driven drug developers, so that you can actually have that group together and make use of it. So how did we do this? Well, this is a group from, I think, a year and a half ago of the task force, or at least some members of the task force. And what we've done is we worked together on a task force with 27 drug repurposing experts and rare disease experts. This was our meeting, and actually screened the landscape for what are the tools and incentives and best practices out there. And we actually came to 46 specific tools on, or at least incentives, and that could be a coupled combined for repurposing. And we actually evaluated them throughout different case scenarios. So different cases of drug repurposing, whether it's off patent, on patent, all kinds of cases, what you would actually use. And then plotted these, what we call building blocks or incentives, throughout the different phases and milestones of drug repurposing. And we actually also made a couple of cross-sectional lists, so checklists, what to do, when to do, how to get started, as such. And we also actually went one step further, and that will be at the very end, of saying, okay, this is how the landscape looks now. How do we think it will look like 3 years from now? And that's always tricky to look into the global ball. Well, this was a group a year and a half ago with which we didn't work, but that work didn't come out of a vacuum situation, because we had actually done already quite a number of steps on drug repurposing. For about 6 years ago, we actually started on drug repurposing and actually set out recommendations for funders. We actually worked on interviewing people on sustainable economic models for repurposing, so what are the factors into that. We'd actually developed already a guidebook for orphan drug development, and actually that's where this next step was based on. And then we actually went into the drug repurposing guidebook. So, what has been the basis that we start working on? So we actually used quite a simple framework of repurposing, which starts with, of course, with what is the patient's needs, then what information do we need to know about the disease, what's the potential targets, product discovery, non-clinical proof of principle, and then there's one that, of course, is not needed here. We will skip the first human study because, well, the drug has been already on the market for others. And then, of course, human proof of concepts, pivotal data, marketing authorization and access, market access, and then, of course, patient care. But it is, however, important to realize that this arrow continues and actually is supposed to loop back into patient's need again if you actually make sure that what you started out to do, you actually achieved in doing. And we've taken as a starting point also the traditional regulatory activities. And we've looked into 3 geographical regions, Europe and United States and Japan. And we see here the EMA scientific advice, the EMA pre-submission meetings, the traditional activities of the FDA, so the pre-IND meeting, the phase 2, end of phase 2 meeting, and then the end of phase 3 meeting. And also the Japanese PMDA consultations. And then, of course, since we're often working with children, the PIP, the Pediatric Investigation Plan. So we did our search, and as I said, we found 46 specific tools, incentives for drug repurposing. And what they were actually made out of is, first of all, a category of regulatory, so different regulatory pathway that you can actually use, either in Europe, United States, or in Japan. A very small and way too small, as we've heard over the last days, group of HCN reimbursement tools, development practices, and then, of course, quite a big group of development resources. And we've plotted them, as you see, and this is quite a big figure. Don't try to read it. We're going to go through it in several steps. We're going to go through it in starting, what is at the start, then the blue block, the yellow block, and the orange block. And most importantly, we also have a cross-sectional tracked list of what should you check for at every given stage. So, first of all, how do you actually get started? And a lot of people have actually asked me this. It's like, yeah, okay, I would like to start a repurposing project, but what do I actually need to do to have a good start and actually being able to actually ensure this project? And START is actually not only the START, it's actually an acronym that stands for Stakeholder Mapping, Available Information on the Disease and the Drug, Financial Resources, and Target Patient Value Profile. And if we go look at every step, we see that on the stakeholder mapping, and this is actually also discussed yesterday in the talk from Nicky Siro, it's really important to have everyone on board. So patient organizations, clinical stakeholders, development and structures, contact with TTO, and most importantly, engagement with the current, but also potentially the future marketing authorization holder, as we just heard. Then available information on the disease, so natural history, but also information on IP and data inside and outside the public domain. Financial resources to get started, but also continue. And then, of course, a target patient value profile to understand what it means for a patient. So, an important key takeaway already is to see if all the information on the disease is there before getting started, and if not, collect more, but also truly build out that solid stakeholder network so that you have everyone on board. And then, of course, to collect every information you can on the drug, such as the IP, the data inside and outside the public domain, and the regulatory background of the drug that is already on the market. Well, then the blue block. And that blue block has truly been about engagement. So for each one of the tools and incentives we actually mapped out when should you get started. So that's the left side of the arrow. When should you stop? Right side of the arrow. What's the optimal time? That's the dot. And when are times that you don't actually need it? That's what it skips to. Or things that you should do in the background. That's sort of this tool. So we have one block on engagement with the marketing authorization holder. And of course, working in public-private space, which is most often the case. Contact with TTO and patent. And then patient and key opinion leader engagement. And then, of course, funding. So truly a block about all kinds of engagement tools and incentives. A second one has been about regulatory and access. So seeing, okay, what is the clinical development? What can we extrapolate? What can we learn from current existing data? But also, what are the next steps that you use if you want to use, for instance, in a different population? So what can you actually take from that? A step on orphan drug designation, so how to make sure that you get a new orphan drug designation. And then a step on all the different regulatory and HTA engagement tools. And with that, the different incentives that we've heard, such as the ILA pathway, but also PUMA and the other, the STAMP and STARS initiative. And then, of course, how to design your trials and what are the alternative methods to do so. And then a third step has been how can we actually build upon existing tools, but also existing data. And we see here a number of initiatives that have been presented yesterday also, such as CureID, but really making sure to gather all the data available that is inside or outside of the public domain in one way or another. But also the compound networks and the databases that you can actually analyze all of the existing compounds that are out there. And then, of course, a lot of, and this is a growing category, a lot of supporting tools that can actually, networks and organizations that can actually help you get in touch with a lot of organizations and get to the right the next steps. Well, we made one final checklist, and that has truly been, can we at several times throughout the procedure say, are you ready for the next step? And that's truly been questions that help you ask yourself and challenge yourself whether you're ready. So that is, what is your research as your basis of your hypothesis? What is existing disease knowledge? What are gaps? What is the population? What is the current standard of care? What is actually happening with that standard of care? But also questions such as, what is your freedom to operate with your patents? What is your regulatory strategy? And many other questions that are sub-specified, but that also link back towards the different building blocks so that if you can't answer a question, you can actually find more information in the building block. Well, and then we've actually tried one last step, and that is, can we have a crystal ball? Because these 46 are nice and out there, but we do know that the landscape is developing quite fast. So what we've also done is look into where we think we're going to see. We have some tools, but we're going to see more. And I think the first one, rightly so, is innovation platforms. And there are a couple that you might know or might not know that actually do bring a lot of innovation platforms together. We see increasing amount of real-world data and actually being able to build upon that, and we'll see more tools there. We hope and we expect there to be a lot more information coming out of AI. And then, of course, also regulatory initiatives that help this process increasingly so, and patient engagement initiatives. And what I eventually would like to see is here coming a second category, which are the HTA tools that we need to truly bring this on market, but it's currently not there yet. So, to finish up before my time is on, what are my take-home messages? So, first of all, really to start with the patient's need rather than just an idea. And then start truly with engaging a good, solid network of current and future marketing authorization holders, but also patients, key opinion leaders, and everyone that you truly need throughout the process. To collect the information on the drug, such as the IP, but also every data that is somewhere out there, and the regulatory background of your existing drug. Then truly continue with gathering data, so all the non-clinical, clinical trial data, real-world data, prevalence data, natural history data, to really use that for your development plan. Well, important also to start on time with thinking about a sustainable marketing access plan, and we've seen that that can be a challenging aspect. And then also to say, can we end with patient's need rather than patient's care? And of course, as usual, to say that regulatory advice is quite essential throughout the procedure and should be asked as early as possible. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and open to any questions.